Let's dive into a topic that is, well, woven into the very fabric of American history: racism. Now, this is a seriously complex and deep-rooted issue, and to really understand its impact today, you've got to go back to the beginning. This statement right here, it just gets right to the heart of it all. See, racism isn't just about one person's prejudice against another. No, it's a structured system of belief built on these ideas of who's superior and who's inferior. And that concept is the foundation for, well, everything we're about to unpack.
So where did these beliefs even come from? We're going to start at the very beginning, tracing the roots of racism from the first European encounters in the Americas all the way to the creation of a really rigid social hierarchy. This timeline sort of maps out how this whole ideology evolved. It really kicks off in the 16th century with the oppression of Native Americans. Then it gets locked in through the absolutely brutal system of enslavement. And then, well, after the Civil War, it just changes shape. It morphs into a new kind of control, the Jim Crow laws. Each era just built on the one before.
And all of this hardened into a really crucial concept, the racial hierarchy. You know, this wasn't just about social classes. It was an absolute system, where enslaved Africans were legally considered property, a status that was passed down to their children. This denied them not just their freedom, but their very humanity in the eyes of the law.
So after slavery was abolished, you might think the hierarchy would disappear, right? Nope. It was just rebuilt under a new name: Jim Crow. This was a whole system designed to keep that racial control in place, using both the law and terror.
Life under Jim Crow meant total segregation. I mean, from water fountains to schools, everything was separate. It meant creating things like poll taxes and literacy tests designed for one reason: to stop Black people from voting. It meant being locked out of opportunities and trapped in economic systems like sharecropping, which, let's be honest, was often just another name for slavery. It was a complete, all-encompassing system of oppression.
And this whole system was enforced with brutal, horrifying violence. The number you're looking at, 3,446, that's the number of documented lynchings of African Americans between 1882 and 1968. And this wasn't random. It was a tool of pure terror, meant to reinforce that caste system and punish anyone who even thought about challenging it.
We're talking about these massive, systemic forces. But what did all of this actually mean for a regular person just trying to live their life day to day? Let's zoom in on one story that really shows the human impact of it all. We're going to look at the story of Rosa Parks. And while you probably know her name, the little details of the world she had to navigate every single day, they just brilliantly illustrate the crushing weight of Jim Crow segregation.
Just try to imagine this humiliating ritual every single day. To ride a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, a Black person had to pay their fare up at the front, then get off the bus, walk all the way to the back, and get on again through the rear door. This had nothing to do with logistics. It was a deliberate daily reminder of their so-called second-class status.
And the rules inside the bus were just as rigid. The front was for whites only, even if those seats were empty and the back was packed. The middle section was this weird gray area, but the rule was absolute. If a white person needed a seat, a Black person had to stand up. The bus was literally a small-scale model of the entire social order. So, on this one day, December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, a seamstress on her way home from work, was sitting in that middle section. The bus started to fill up, and the driver demanded she give her seat to a white man who was standing. She was tired, and not just physically tired from work, but tired of the discrimination. And she just said, no. The driver's response was swift, and it was predictable. He wasn't just enforcing some company policy, he was enforcing the law of Jim Crow. This was the threat that kept the whole system in place. You comply, or the full force of the law is coming down on you. And her response, you may do that. So calm, so resolute, and it changed the world. With just those 4 words, she wasn't just defying a bus driver anymore, she was defying the entire structure of racial hierarchy. Her quiet stand was about to get very, very loud.
Her arrest was the spark. But you know, a spark needs fuel to become a fire. And that fuel was an entire community, organized and completely unified. This brings us to the Montgomery bus boycott, which was really a masterclass in how to take collective action.
For 381 days, the Black community of Montgomery refused to ride the buses. Just think about that commitment. For over a year, they walked, they set up carpools, they put up with harassment, all to demand their basic human dignity.
And this chart really shows you the strategic genius behind the protest. Black citizens made up about 60% of the people riding the bus. By refusing to ride, they weren't just making a moral statement, they were using real economic power. Their unified action hit the city right where it hurt, the bottom line. They proved that the very system designed to hold them down couldn't actually function without them.
And you know what? It worked. The boycott ended with a Supreme Court ruling that made segregation on Montgomery's buses illegal. But its impact was so much bigger than that. It launched a young minister named Martin Luther King Jr. onto the national stage. And it provided a blueprint for nonviolent protest that would fuel the entire civil rights movement.
Now, that victory in Montgomery was a huge step, for sure, but it wasn't the end of the story. The fight against systemic racism has just continued to evolve, taking on new forms in all the decades since.
You can draw a really clear line connecting the past to the present. The huge legal victories of the mid-20th century, they paved the way for the modern movements you see today, protests against police violence, or the rise of movements like Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. The issues and the hashtags might change, but that underlying struggle for equality and justice, it's the same fight.
So that's the arc of the story. From a system that defined people as property to a single bus ride that helped change a nation, all the way to the protests we see in our streets today. This history isn't over. It's a living, breathing story that continues to shape our present, and really, it challenges all of us to decide what it's going to mean for our future.
Let's talk about racism in the United States. It's a subject that's constantly in the headlines, and it really shapes our society. But to actually understand why it's still such a powerful force today, we've got to go back. We need to trace its long and, honestly, very complicated history.
So this is really the core question, isn't it? Why, after all this time, are we still grappling with this? To find the answer, we have to look past today's news cycle and start pulling on the historical thread that brought us to right here, right now.
I mean, think about 2020. The death of George Floyd sparked this massive wave of protests. The Black Lives Matter movement became one of the largest in U.S. history, and it put racial inequality right back at the center of the national conversation. You just couldn't ignore it. And it's not just a single issue affecting just one community. Around the same time, we saw this really scary spike in anti-Asian violence, which was often tied to the pandemic. And that, in turn, sparked powerful movements like the #StopAsianHate campaign.
Okay, so here's the thing. These modern movements, they're not just happening in a vacuum. They're really the latest chapters in a story that started centuries ago. So to get a handle on the present, we've got to start at the beginning.
The groundwork for all of this, for systemic discrimination in America, it was actually laid before the United States was even a country. When European explorers first arrived, they brought these ideas about race with them that would literally shape the New World. And a clear hierarchy was set up almost immediately. Native Americans were often dismissed as savages, and that idea was used to justify centuries of oppression that just decimated their population. At the same time, the enslavement of Africans was uniquely brutal. I mean, this wasn't like other forms of slavery in history. This was a permanent hereditary status. It legally defined human beings as property, passed down from one generation to the next.
So then you have the Civil War, which ends, and there's this promise of a brand new era of freedom and equality. But, and this is a huge but, this incredible moment of progress was met with an immediate, violent, and super-organized backlash that was designed to keep that old hierarchy in place.
Now look at the timing here. This is what's so wild. Progress and backlash are happening at almost the exact same time. The very same year, slavery is officially abolished. The KKK is formed. That's not a coincidence, right? It was a calculated effort to preserve the way things were before the war. And just as black men get the right to vote, this whole system of laws we now call Jim Crow starts popping up to snatch that right away.
And this backlash was brutally violent. Between 1882 and 1968, there were at least 3,446 documented lynchings of African Americans. And this wasn't just random violence. It was a targeted campaign of terror meant to enforce a racial caste system, especially in the South.
So the key takeaway here is that this wasn't just about social prejudice or people being mean to each other. Jim Crow was a legal framework. It was a whole web of state and local laws that made segregation the law of the land. And it touched every single part of life, from where you could drink water to whether you could cast a vote.
But oppression always breeds resistance. And sometimes, a huge movement can be sparked by the quiet courage of just one person. And that brings us to the incredible story of Rosa Parks.
This was the kind of daily humiliation that was just normal under segregation. So back in 1943, an exhausted Rosa Parks got on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She paid her fare up front, and the driver, a man named James Blake, told her to get off and re-enter through the packed rear door. But then he just drove off before she could even get back on.
Okay, fast forward 12 years. It's a cold December evening, and Rosa Parks gets on another bus after a long day of work. She sits down, looks up, and she's startled to see the bus driver. It was the very same man, James Blake. So when the white section of the bus filled up, Blake ordered Parks and other black passengers to give up their seats. She refused. He threatened her. He said, "Well, I'm going to have you arrested." And her response, so calm and so firm, was, "You may do that." News of her arrest spread like wildfire. Black community leaders, including a very young Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., organized a boycott of the entire city bus system. For 381 days, think about that, more than a year, the black community walked, they carpooled, they organized, they just refused to ride the buses. It was this incredible act of collective resistance. And the courage of people like Rosa Parks and the power of movements like the Montgomery bus boycotts, it fueled a revolution. All that activism led directly to these landmark legislative victories that finally started to tear down the legal structure of Jim Crow.
Now, these victories were absolutely monumental. But just like we saw after the Civil War, progress is so often met with new challenges. The fight for real equality definitely did not end in the 1960s. And that brings us right back to where we started. The protests we see today against police violence and systemic discrimination, they aren't new. They're echoes of this long, complex, and often painful history we've just walked through together. The story of racism in America really is this constant push and pull, this cycle of progress and backlash. Understanding that cycle is the key to making sense of our present moment. And it leaves us with a really important question to think about. What comes next?